Hi everyone, a lot of familiar faces in the room. I'm going to spend 15 minutes or so getting everyone up to speed on recent developments in an old story. So lots going on in this space. It's not an easy space to navigate 2-3 levels of government and 9 First Nation groups and the commodity markets and all that, but we're up for it. So here we go. That's a recent shot at our site, not that recent, last winter. A lot of our work up at the Ring of Fire gets done in the winter for obvious reasons. It's a very marshy and swampy area, but and that importantly goes to how we approach mining and developing some of the projects. Forward-looking information. Just to remind everyone, about 500 kilometers northeast of Thunder Bay in the James Bay lowlands, and I've shown the number of First Nation communities around the Ring of Fire in stars. The most important communities are the ones that are most proximal: Webequie First Nation to the west and Martin Falls First Nation to the south. Another community that's important is Arrowland First Nation, and that's because the road that's going to be developed goes through their traditional territory, and they want to play a role in the economic development, probably in the way of a partner in a transload facility. So these are the key communities. You can see Victor Diamond Mine to the east, Musselwhite Gold Mine to the west, fly-in, fly-out operations. In Musselwhite's case, they've got a road as well. But in our case, no road network, no infrastructure within 300 kilometers, and that's the big enabler. There's no two ways about it. It's all about getting that road, all-season road infrastructure in place and allowing the development of these base metal properties. A little bit, I'm the president and CEO. Steve Flewelling, who a lot of you will know, is with me. We had careers mostly with Falconbridge and Noront and the other big Canadian mining houses. Moved on with Xstrata and Glencore internationally. We built and operated mines and smelters all over the world. I was mostly the mine manager. Steve was mostly on the project side, but we kind of went back and forth a bit. Greg Reevely, who's in the back of the room, is our CFO. Greg comes from a finance background. Aber Diamonds, Harry Winston Diamonds, Dundee Precious is Greg's background. If you're in this game developing greenfields resource projects in Canada, you've got to have some of your DNA, First Nation people of quality. And we've got that with Glenn Nolan. And again, a lot of you will know Glenn and some of his accomplishments. Glenn was the former chief of the Missinaba Cree for a number of years, did great economic development work for the Missinaba Cree. They got about 70 businesses under their shell now. Glenn was also the president of PDAC, so it brings a lot of credibility to our organization when we're dealing with the local communities. There we are. So, the Ring of Fire story. About 5 years ago, there was an exodus from this story. Timelines were getting extended. It became obvious that the dealings with the First Nation communities were getting complicated. It was important to have investment from governments to enable the roads and the infrastructure. A lot of people headed for the exits. And I joined the company just about that time. And what I liked about this play, and I'd looked at it as part of Xstrata Nickel, was a very, very high quality nickel deposit had been discovered. Other deposits were being developed, but this was a typical greenstone belt, 2.7 billion year old greenstone belt in the Shield of Canada. And there was an opportunity to acquire the entire thing. So when others were heading out, we doubled down. And thanks to Franco-Nevada, who had a similar long-term view, they helped us finance a major purchase, which was the purchase of Cliffs Natural Resources. We also managed to do a deal with McDonald Mines, and we took other equity positions in some of the juniors. We're the largest shareholder of KWG, we're the largest shareholder of Debut Diamonds, but we consolidated the whole picture. So out of the 21 deposits that have been discovered to date in Ring of Fire, we own or control 20 of them. So we're all in on this, and some days we feel very clever about that, and other days we sort of wonder whether that was the right move. The project pipelines here on the right, the most advanced deposit is Eagle's Nest. That's had a full feasibility done. That's the nickel, copper, platinum, palladium deposit. Has a little bit of cobalt as well. And soon after that, we'd see the development of a couple of the big chromite assets. The reason's quite simple. The Eagle's Nest deposit is the most advanced from a project point of view, but also from a smelting point of view. There are 2 smelters in Ontario that are hungry for this kind of a feed, and they're permitted and operating. Whereas on the chrome side of the ledger, there's no chrome mining in North America, there's no chrome smelting in North America. Our vision is to do both, but we would have to build the ferrochrome processing facility that we've planned to build in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, in partnership with Algoma Steel. But that's going to take a considerable amount of permitting and financial effort. And so it makes sense to do the nickel project first, and then afterwards take on the chrome projects. There are other things. There's diamonds, there's gold, there's vanadium in the region. That's for a later date. On the nickel side of things, a very typical massive sulfide nickel deposit, mostly massive sulfide, a little bit of disseminated and net texture. The only unique aspects are, although it does come to surface, we won't do an open pit. It is a boggy, swampy terrain, and you'd be managing all sorts of water inflows right off the bat. Water is probably the most sensitive issue to the local First Nations. They don't want to see water issues or problems. So we're just eliminating that. It also reduces the footprint dramatically, not having any waste rock piles, not having a big open pit on the landscape. So it makes a lot of sense for us from a point of view of sort of the operating logistics, but also the social license to do it all underground. And the other thing that's a bit unusual is that all the tailings will go back underground, 100%. And as most of you would know, you have a swell factor, and you always have to have a surface tailings pond. In our case, we also need an underground quarry because there's no rock material to build airstrips or roads or site services or what have you. That quarry will be a bulk underground series of stopes that will also take that swell from the tailings, so all the tailings go back underground. Again, when we asked the First Nations what they were worried about when we were talking about developing the mines, they didn't know an awful lot about the mining business, but they'd all heard about dam failures. They'd all heard about tailings pond issues. So if we can just eliminate that completely by putting all the tails underground, again, goes to that social license and partnership. The deposit's fabulous. The best part of it really is the byproduct platinum and palladium. If Jim Gallagher was here, I'd give him a run for his money. I think our byproduct platinum and palladium is probably equivalent to their head grade over at North American Palladium. It's a great deposit, and that kind of polymetallic aspect really helps. It's about a 20 million ton deposit. It's open at depth. It'll produce about 3,000 tons of ore per day, about 1 million tons per annum, so a 20-year mine life. And the project economics in 2012 saw an NPV of about $550 million using an 8% discount. That was using metal prices of the day in 2012. If you plug in metal prices of today, it's even more handsome. It's more like an $800 million NPV. So very nice project to start with in the Ring of Fire. Soon after, we would turn our attention not to Black Thor, which is the largest of the deposits of the chrome. We'd actually go to Black Bird first because it's within 500 meters of the development at Eagle's Nest. And so any infrastructure, camp, airstrip, processing facilities, machine shops, and so forth, could be shared with the Blackbird mine. And you can see the reserves and the resources here. For example, Black Thor, which hasn't been drilled below about 300 meters, that's why it's flat at the bottom, but already you've got somewhere in the order of about 140 million tons of about 30% plus CR203. Now there's probably about 2 people in the room that know what 30% plus Cr2O3 means. That's about the equivalent of maybe 4% nickel as a head grade, probably the equivalent of about, for Christian, about 18% zinc there, Christian. So that's the kind of, and all together with all the deposits combined here, the chrome deposits, we got about 250 million tons of about 35% Cr2O3. So again, that's the scale of the resource, the caliber of the resource. Most chrome seams that get mined in South Africa and other areas are typically in the order of a meter, meter and a half in thickness. Black Thor averages 80 meters in thickness. So an unparalleled resource, but again, without a road, worthless. Just a little bit more on the market in chrome, because it's a pretty opaque market. You dig up the chrome ore, you smelt it into ferrochrome. Chrome ore is an oxide, so you got to get rid of the oxygen. You add carbon units in the smelting process, and you make a ferrochrome, iron and chrome. And that ferrochrome gets sold to stainless steel producers. Now, in the case of the United States stainless steel producers, you can see where they're located, mostly in the industrial Northeast, and there's one plant in Alabama. Those stainless steel producers, they depend right now on imports from South Africa and Kazakhstan. So that's the business case. We want to produce a high carbon ferrochrome product, sell it to these stainless steel producers in the US, and undercut the imports from Kazakhstan and from South Africa. And that was the reason why we chose to site our ferrochrome production facility in Sault Ste. Marie. We really liked the location. It was a brownfield site that we could repurpose, so that made it easier from a permitting point of view. But also it had power there, it had the infrastructure, it had the rail and the road, and it had the access to water. And partnering with Algoma allows us to share a lot of their infrastructure, like their loading and unloading facilities and laydown areas. And so that was a big part of the deal we recently announced with Algoma Steel. So very, very important, to physically locate where you have an advantage. Those ferrochrome units would go to Chicago and then by way of the Inland Canal system to those producers in the northeastern United States. The other partnership we announced was with Hatch. And so we partnered with Hatch to design the smelter plant. And we're very pleased with that. We'd had a previous experience with Hatch. Steve and I had building the ferronickel smelter in New Caledonia, and similar technology. We'd like to build that plant with Hatch, and so very pleased with that partnership as well. You can see that the US market is relatively small, maybe only 6% of the marketplace. That's a good starting place for us. Get into the market, establish yourself as a credible, high quality producer, and then expand and take on the European market, for example. So the key enabler here is roads. I'm happy to say we've had a lot of progress. Once upon a time, Noront was the proponent of all of this road network. So most of you will know when you do a project, you do a project description, which includes your mining operation, how deep, how big, how wide, and so forth, but it also includes the access to your mining operation. Although the government of Ontario was prepared to pay for this road, they wanted us to do the environmental assessment and have that in our project description. We started down that path. It became very difficult to advance. Most of the effort does not go into the engineering side of things, nor the environmental assessment, the baseline work, the studies and so forth. Most of it, the expensive and time-consuming part, is the consultation. And this is no different. In fact, it's probably a bit more, onerous than other projects because it's a long linear disturbance. So we started down this road. It quickly became apparent that the communities who had the traditional land wanted to have a heightened involvement in this. They really wanted to be involved. They wanted to have some say in how the work went. They wanted to have their traditional knowledge incorporated into the studies. And we thought that, wow, maybe we're doing this wrong. Why don't we let the communities lead this work? And we're happy to use the roads as a customer, but they can lead the environmental assessment, make sure it's done well and to their heart's content. So we did exactly that. We pushed back on the province. The province agreed with the vision. We approached the First Nations, and the traditional land users, in the case of Arrowland, Martin Falls, and Webequie, are now advancing the EA. They're a year into the EA work. And they did exactly what we would do. They went out and they hired reputable engineering and environmental assessment firms. We're in the background helping and coaching, because we've done this before. We meet with Martin Falls, for example, every 2 weeks. And together we're steering this ship in. And I think it's a great way of doing it. If the communities are supportive and they want the road networks and they want the economic uplift, let them lead the process. So really cool. Now the only piece where we're still the proponent of this piece of the road, that's fine. At some point in time, we'd like someone to partner with us or to come in on that, take that proponency off our hand. In the meantime, we'll advance that. And most likely Martin Falls will end up being a co-proponent or taking that over, but we want to make sure everything gets done on a timely basis. So the Premier talks about having shovels in the ground next year. Listen, I mean, I'm not gonna tell you that the Premier can't do anything he wants, but what we're talking about next year is actually only an upgrade of this existing forestry road, okay? So yes, it is progress. Yes, it is shovels in the ground on the road development, but it is just an upgrade. An upgrade to a forestry road gets a Class EA. It doesn't take as much work, right? But we estimate there's probably about 1.5 years left to do on the EAs there and all the public reviews, which we think will go pretty well because it is the communities themselves that are leading it. That's a very high level timeline, but you can see we estimate that the EAs will be finished by the end of 2020, and then there's a construction period. During the construction period, the first step of building an all-season road is to create a winter road. And when that winter road is established, we can actually, in earnest, bring goods and materials, supplies, and equipment to the mine site and start construction somewhat in parallel. We would see construction and production out of Eagle's Nest Mine by about 2024, 2025. Exploration-wise, we're looking for a partner to develop some of the gold deposits that we have found in the region. They're very early stage. We're not gold guys, we're base metal guys, so we're looking for a partner on the gold and the Ring of Fire. But our main focus right now is on all the other nickel potential that's in this region. It's a huge district, about 100 kilometers from tip to tail, and we think there's many more Eagle's Nests to be found. Social license, key for what we do. And so we've got partnerships in place with the local communities, the traditional landholders. We've made several of them shareholders of Noront Resources. So they're partners in more than one way. But this is key for us. We want them to benefit and participate in this economic uplift. If you expect government to invest, hundreds of millions, $1 billion in infrastructure, there has to be something in it for government too. It's a very unique opportunity to build social and industrial infrastructure at the same time, and because of the long life, get this big uplift for the local communities. I think I've run out of my time here, Raina, so I'm going to hand it over to you, and thank you very much.
Yeah.